Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies, owner and principal. Here with another question. Got another question here about FMC or SMC, depending on who you ask, versus CDO. So on-prem versus cloud. Which one would you do and why? So let's start with the whiteboard here. I like to do my titles. So let's do the title. Let's say I'm just going to do FMC because that's what I was classically trained on as the name versus CDO, right? And I think there's a different name for CDO as well, like cloud security something now. They always change the name. You know how Cisco marketing does. So basically, what we're talking about is on-prem versus the cloud. Now, I'm just gonna be flat out honest with you. I would probably go the CDO route. Now, why would I do that? Because let's look at the design from a design standpoint, and we'll talk about on-prem. So on-prem would basically be, you know, FMC, maybe HAFMC if you want. Let's go with that, FMC 1 and 2. And then I'll just say network in the middle. So this is your network in the middle. And let's say we have FTD1, FTD2. And we'll have it in HA, plugs here, dirty switch, internet, management through there, right? So with that type of typical design here, if we are doing this type of design, you always need to have some type of way to get to the FMC, right? And that's usually going to involve some type of RA So if you're a net admin over here with your computer, your laptop, or whatever, here's the desk. I've got to put some arms, clickety clickety. And what they're going to do is RAVPN into this so that it can manage these FMCs here, this FMC pair here. So to manage this. Problem with that is if the FTDs ever go down, you can never get to the FMC. Even if you hook it in with like the cloud, even if you hook it into it, the cloud function, what it does is it just hooks into the FMC, and then you're going to have to give the FMC a public IP address anyway, and still has to go through one of these FTDs here. And then from the cloud hooks into the FMC. If one of these FTDs go down, now from redundancy standpoint, you have this secondary one. So technically all that should transfer over. But let's say, something happens on one of these FTDs, some weird situation where I have seen that happen where failover doesn't fail over appropriately or something happens and there's some kind of traffic disruption. Now you can't get to the FMC to do anything. Now, FTDs are, stable based on your design. They're not going to be as stable if you have a bad design. I have a video on that. Let's check it out. But, if you want to buy this equipment, there is a cost here. It's a hard CapEx for this. Hard CapEx, right? So you're going to have to spend some money to get FMCs and all that good stuff. The other thing is if you don't right size this FMC, if you get a smaller FMC, you're going to have to spend money again to upgrade to the beefier version of the FMC to handle more devices. Case in point, if you get like a 1000 series FMC, I believe that only could go to like 7.9, I believe. 709 is the version. Well, right now they're on, I believe, the latest and greatest is 742. So if you know the rules of upgrade, your FMC can be higher than your FTDs, but not vice versa. So you can't manage the FTD version that's higher than the FMC version that's trying to manage it. So if you can only go to 709, then your FTDs are kind of, even if they can go to, 742, they're kind of hindered to stay at 709 because the FMC that's managing them can't go past that. So that's one of the problems you run into if you do on-prem FMC capital expenditure. If you don't get the right size, you either are going to oversize it or you're going to undersize it. If you oversize it, it's a little better situation than undersizing it, because if you undersize it, you got to pay more money. So you're going to either pay up more money up front or you're going to end up paying twice. So there is a saying, if you don't buy it nice, you end up buying it twice. So always remember that one. Now, from a cloud perspective, so we're talking about, CDO, or whatever Cisco's calling it now. What you have in the cloud basically is this thing called a CD FMC. So cloud deliver FMC. And then you can have multiple FTDs hooked into this thing, right? Because now FTD through, and I'll say internet here, through the magic of complaining by the users, and this is a good complaint too, they have this thing now called a management data interface, right? And what this management data interface basically does, it allows you to do management in the data plane, right? In the data plane. Say these are data plane interfaces. Now, before all of this, you would have a separate interface off to the side here, separate, that was strictly for management. The problem with that is if you had an FTD on the other side, there was a couple things that you had to do. You had to give it a public IP address. Then you had to put the management interface, expose that to the internet. Now, from a management perspective, these things were only listening to TCP 80305. And there's really no exploit that I know for TCP 8305. Now, the problem is you had to have some serious security, because if someone was able to log in for some odd reason, if they were able to log in, they got to the CLI of your FTD, they can pretty much do whatever they want, right? If they had admin rights, they can pretty much, this is Linux under the hood, they could pretty much crash the whole Linux system. So now that you don't have to worry about this anymore because you have these management data interfaces, all you do is you're going to do it onboarding, and they call it, let me put onboarding here, they call it onboarding in CDO. So they have this thing called onboarding, and I know I spelled that wrong, but whatever. So what you would do is there's a traditional onboarding. The good thing about this is you can also hook into a on-prem FMC. So you can manage, say there was an FMC down here for some reason, say there was an FMC, you could technically through API, and we're going to say, hook into this via API. And then when you wanted to manage these on-prem boxes, say they had the tunnel here, you would basically tunnel our API call into this FMC and manage these boxes. And you can also do a migration. It depends on the version. I think you had to be on 7.4 to migrate these off the on-prem FMC into the CD FMC. But if you're going to see, if you have a chance to like deploy this first time out, I would really think about whether you want to control it with the FMC on-prem versus the cloud. There is some latency from the CD FMC perspective because it has to get to the outside interface, right? You're technically going to make this the outside interface, right? So these are going to be the outside interface. And then you have that latency issue with the FMC model on-prem. The only latency is your internal network. So, if the FMC was sitting right next to the FTDs or they're in the same subnet for some, based on that design, the latency is not going to be as much as with the CDO model. Now, the thing about the CDO model is it turns into a OpEx thing, right? So there's really no CapEx here, right? Other than, you buy your FTDs and stuff like that. But from a CDO, it really turns into a OpEx thing because it's a monthly cost, I believe, or you can pay annually here, depending on the license. So don't quote me on that. But this thing auto updates. So if if the latest and greatest is 742, you're automatically on 742, and then you can upgrade your FTDs to 742 no problem. The other things you can do migrations. Like say if you had a ASA over here that you wanted to migrate to an FTD, you used to have this migration software that you'd have to download, and you'd have to get the run configurations, and then upload it. Would run, you would run the software, it would run like some type of web server on your laptop on the background, and then you would do the migration. With this, it kind of takes out of that web server thing, because you can still upload your ASA configurations, and it will parse it, do everything, and then you can push it down to your FTD via the management interface, but it's all in one console, right? Now, there are some limitations like logging. The logging on a on-prem FMC is a lot better than the the CD FMC. Now, it really really depends, right? Like if you're just going to look at everything in the FMC, they're pretty much the same. Um, the advanced features like TrustSec, SGTs and stuff like that, TrustSec or AD integration is better on the on-prem, because with the FMC, they do this thing where they proxy one of the FTDs that's closest to the source. So let's say your AD was on this FMC back here. So over here was AD. Well, FMC will proxy this FTD to get the, memberships, the AD memberships are, if ICE was back here as well, it would actually it would proxy to this FTD, which would get to ICE for the PX grid integration. And then that's how it would get the IP to SGT mappings up to CDFMC. Now, if you ain't doing anything that advanced, then, that's a gotcha that you got to worry about. Like, it's better to do this type of stuff on the on-prem FMC. Also, the CDFMC, there's no HA. There's really no need for HA because it's in the cloud. It's somebody else's data center. So they should be backing up your stuff, right? The things that you would have to do is back up your local FTD, like device configurations and stuff like that. FMC, there's more management overhead. You own it, you manage it. That means you better have backups. You better have some type of HA if you want management functionality, stuff like that. Where should you go? Well, again, it depends. Do you want complete control, or do you want to leave that control up to Cisco in terms of your management device for your FTDs? Do you want management to be in the control plane? I mean, in the data plane, or do you want to have a separate control plane with a separate management interface that you don't have to worry if there is a hiccup in the data plane, it doesn't mess with your management? That's one thing you gotta take into factor, because if something goes wrong in the data plane and it's also your management plane, then management and data plane is down. If something's wrong in the data plane on the on-prem FMC, but the management is using the management interfaces, you can still technically get to the FTDs without, even if the data plane is messed up, right? And again, if the FMC is down, data plane will still work. You just can't have any management functionalities, and that's with on-prem FMC or CDO. The other thing is ease of administration. When you want to make a change, do you want to go through that whole previous thing where you have to RAVPN, and then you got to make sure you get to the FMC, make a change, and you got to push it? If you do that, you could lose connectivity to management as those devices are being pushed, especially if something that's going to cause like a quick change in the inspection engine, which can bring down traffic for like a blip. Right now, when you got the same thing can happen in the CDO, because if you're making a change now that your management and data plane is in the same interface, if you make something that messes up the data plane, you could potentially lose access to CDO, which loses management. That's why you should always put the revert back after a couple seconds or a couple minutes. If I can't contact the FTD, it auto rolls back the configurations. You should do that on all your device configurations. If you're not doing that, then you're setting yourself up for a disaster there. But to answer the question, it really depends on the control. Do you want to control everything, or do you want to, you know, give your FMC management in terms of the boxes that you have to CDO? Small company, CDO is probably the better option. I'm gonna just be honest with you. CDO is probably the better option for a smaller company, small bank, community bank, doctor's office, stuff like that. You really don't want to manage that through the FDM. FDM is cool, but it's totally different from your traditional FTD, FMC management. So you really don't want to go that route with the FDM. FDM to me is like the last case scenario. So hopefully that answers this question about what you should go with. For me, I'm kind of starting to lean towards CDO. So I mean, hopefully that answers your question. Keep sending me those questions again. Thank you. Hopefully this video was informative. Thank you and have a nice day.